And recently I've been involved into a number of projects with Water Mission organization. So Water Mission is a non-profit out of Charleston, South Carolina. And basically what they're doing, what their purpose is to be able to deliver safe water solutions to communities around the world. And they were founded in 2001, and mostly they're doing their work in kind of developing countries, in Asia, South America, Africa, and they've done a lot in the last 15 years, hundreds of projects. They're doing both sanitation types of projects and water treatment. So I'm mostly going to talk about water treatment projects because that's the side of their business that we are involved into. And what they're doing in this space is they allow those communities to have access to clean water. So imagine, some kind of village, let's say in Africa. They usually have a water source. It could be a river or a lake or a stream or a well. But what people don't know is that all of those data sources, they contaminated in some way or another. So it's just not safe to drink this water unfiltered. So what Water Mission does, they go into those communities and they install so-called living water treatment system, which they invented. And it does exactly that. That takes water from those contaminated sources, filters it, and then this water is being delivered to people in this community. Now, it's not free. So the way it's set up, that Water Mission comes and they build a kiosk, or maybe a couple of kiosks, where they set up this living water treatment system. They would have an operator actually working in these kiosks and managing this kiosk, and they would distribute like a water cards, or they call it smart cards, something like credit card, to households in the community. And then people would put money on those cards, and they would use those cards at the kiosk to pay for clean water. Now, it's done on purpose. It's not free on purpose. And the purpose is that they want those solutions to be maintained and sustainable. A lot of other organizations would come to like disaster areas or those remote places, and they would do something. They would dig a well, or they would install like a filtering system, and it would work, and they would just go away. And what happens in a year, maybe a year and a half, the well gets contaminated, something gets broken, the pump gets broken, and nobody is there to fix it. And nobody really cares, so people go back to their usual way, taking water from the lake, right, or a river. And they get sick, and basically, there is no point. So Water Mission wants community to be kind of involved into this. So because they pay for the water, so they know, that's not something for free. And operator basically, gets some money. That's his job, and he is interested in and responsible for maintaining this kiosk. And the community as a whole becomes kind of a stakeholder in the whole kind of initiative. So for about a year after Water Mission installs those kiosks, they would monitor them. So they would send a technician every month to take all the measurements, and they would analyze how things are going. If something needs to be fixed, they would train people on site to maintain those solutions. And usually after 1 year of this kind of oversight, the community is able to take over it. Also, those kiosks are able to stream data through actually some kind of a cell phone connection into the cloud. So all of the transactions, all of the water dispensing transactions from those kiosks actually gets tracked. And we have access to every one of those transactions. And I'll be showing later on a Jupyter notebook, which we use to analyze this kind of data and do some cool stuff with that. And this is how the kiosk looks like. You can see Well, it's a building, right? And inside this building, there is a living water treatment system. There is a solar panel at the top. That's how it's all got powered. There is an operator and a couple of speakers for water dispensing. So our team, jStart, we started to work with Water Mission in 2015, and we actually ended up being involved in multiple projects with them. And it's an alerting system. We built first version. Now we're working on kind of the second version of that. We also started to create an operational dashboard for them, and we're also doing data analysis on this transactional data and some other data as well. But all of those initiatives, they have one common thing, kind of underline everything. It's a focus on sustainability. So all of those three projects, why we're doing that is because we want to make sure that those kiosks stay operational, right? So we get alerts, about something happening there. We deliver them real time to Water Mission personnel so they can do something about that. Operational dashboard, the same thing. They can look at what's going on in different projects that they manage. And data analysis that we perform, we actually started to analyze the data, trying to find ways to improve something. And initially we didn't know what can we improve. We were looking for ways to improve something in the way those kiosks being operated or managed or promoted, or something that would increase the usage of clean water in the community and get more buy-in from the people around. So I'll be talking mostly about this data analysis part of it, and the notebook which I'm going to show, that's about it. Let me set some context around it. First of all, it's not just one data source. So I talked about this transactional data. So it's water consumption data. Every transaction, we have that. But we have more than that. We used APIs provided by IBM Weather Company to get weather data. So for every day in all of those communities, we have average temperature, we have maximum temperature, we have rainfall amount. So all of that influences amount of water people take from those stations. So we have that data. We also know what are the rainy seasons in them. Oh, and by the way, I'll be talking mostly about communities in Uganda in this case, right? And that's the first three communities we started to look at to do the analysis. So they have two rainy seasons in Uganda, one bigger than another, so we have that data. We also have social economic data, and again, different type of data. So we were able to run some surveys on site in those communities to find out about households, how many people in every household, what are their occupations, how much money they make, what they're doing. We also know what their agricultural seasons, and again, in those communities, they have 2 seasons every year, and some other data as well. And as I mentioned, we have multiple communities. In Uganda, we have data for 3 communities. It's Kikonda, Busira, and Dei. And those 3 communities, they kind of close together geographically, so we can actually meaningfully compare what we get, what we see in the data coming from those 3 communities and come to conclusions what is different in those communities. And we're trying to answer some tough questions based on this data. And what kind of questions? For instance, can we predict a water shortage in a particular community? Or can we predict water outages? Water outages could be just because of a technical failure on the kiosk, or maybe weather related. We don't know. So can we predict that? Can we predict drought conditions? Right? And also, what can we do? What can we recommend them to do in order to increase usage of water from those kiosks? So some really tough questions, and some of them we're still working on, and some of them I'm not even sure we will be able to answer. But the good news that some of those questions we were able to answer even now, kind of in the middle of our engagement. And what I'm going to show is kind of an example of data analysis that we've done using Jupyter notebooks that kind of illustrates like a thought process behind what we went through, right? Where we started, how we looked at the data, and what happened, kind of step by step, how we were able to get to some of the results. It's a little bit simplified, but I hope it will illustrate the point. So for this particular case study, I'll be looking at the data coming from one of those communities. It's Gikondo, and we have more than 1 year worth of data coming from this community, and this is a map. It's on the shore of the Lake Victoria, so they have huge source of water, but it's all contaminated, so it's not safe to drink water from the lake. And it's kind of medium-sized village, I would say, maybe about 300 households there, so it's not huge, but we have a lot of data. As I said, more than 1 year, every single transaction from the kiosk. Inside our team, we're actually using Spark service on Bluemix and notebooks on Bluemix as well. I wouldn't say it's because the huge amount of data. I think we could have do the same just using straight like pandas, but that's what we used. But in this particular demo, I'm going to show it locally on my laptop because I don't want to go out to Bluemix from here. So I have a local Spark cluster set up and a local notebook. Let me open it up. Okay. So this is it. I hope everybody can see it well. So the first step is, I'll just run it step by step, and I'll talk through the logic. First step is kind of obvious. We're importing a bunch of libraries that we're going to use. I mentioned pandas, NumPy, we're using matplotlib, and we're actually using Spark for filtering and aggregation queries here as well. And this is how the data looks like. So this particular Parquet file contains those water consumption transactions. And every transaction has a date, and it's like day, hour, minute, up to the seconds. It contains a card number, obviously. It contains remaining balance on the card after this transaction, and actually how much water was taken, right? And some other information, but those are kind of the important pieces. So the first thing we wanted to do after we got this data file, it's okay, let's see how much water in this community is being dispensed every day. So that's kind of natural first step to analyze the data set. And in order to do that, we need to aggregate the data by days. So all of those transactions has to be merged together. So that's what I'm doing in this step, and I'm printing the first 10 days. And you can see like they started to use this kiosk, and I think it's probably just test this kiosk in May 2015. So the first 3 days, just a little bit of water dispensed, they're probably testing it, and then it goes from there, right? And people actually started to use the kiosk. And amount is in liters over here. So now when we have this aggregated set, let's plot it on a chart. So what I want to see at this point is kind of an overall trend of water consumption over this year, right? Is it going up? Is it going down? So that's what I'm doing. I'm using NumPy to calculate the trend line, and then I'm going to plot it. And this is how it looks like. It's a little bigger than I wanted, but basically you can see what's going on. So it's not good, right? So clearly the trend is going down over the year. It's not kind of precipitous down, but it is down. So something is not going well at this particular location in this community. So as soon as we saw the chart, we were in the mode, okay, let's look at the data and see, can we find some clues why the trend is going down? Is there some kind of intervention that we can make to reverse the trend, right? How do we do it? Where do we start? So we have this data. Okay, we actually went from different angles. We looked at weather, we looked at some other stuff, and finally, the best solution that kind of made our next step possible was really brute force. So what we did, we just said, okay, it's not such a big of a community. It's like 300 houses. They distributed maybe about 180 cards through this community. Let's just print them all. So we basically ended up printing 180 charts of individual consumption for every card. And then we looked at those charts. I'm not going to print 180, but I'm going to print 5. So you'll see what it is. So this is what we got, right? So we got those individual charts for individual cards, right? And I just sat down and I looked at those charts. It took me maybe half an hour and to spot some patterns, how people use their cards. And even on those 5, you can see, like this one, that's what we want to see. So this chart basically shows that this particular household, probably every second day, they would go to the kiosk and get some water, about 40 liters. And they do it throughout the year, no big interruptions. That's the pattern we want to see, right? Well, this second chart, it's okay as well. So they're not quitting, they're taking water. Maybe they're taking a little less water now than they used to. That's something that maybe we should be addressed. But look at this one, or even this one, all of those 3. And what happens here, we see that this household, they started to use the card, they used it for a while, and then they stopped. So, well, that's obviously not good. So we saw a bunch of those in the data set. So we saw a lot of cards with this particular pattern. So they use it, and then they stop, right? And then there is no usage. So now the next question, okay, why did they stop? So you start thinking about that. There could be multiple reasons why they could stop. So maybe they just ran out of money on the card, and they decided not to renew the balance, and they just quit. So another possibility could be maybe they just lost their card, right? And for whatever reason, it's hard for them to get a replacement card. So there could be different reasons, right? So we try to investigate and see what can we see in the data about that. So let's see if we have really, first of all, how many cards are in this inactive condition, right? So let's look at that. So this step, I'm just taking the last date in this data set, and the one I'm using for the demo, it ends at the end of July. Now we have August data, but this one is end of July. And then I'm calculating, for every card, I'm calculating what is the last day for the last transaction on this particular card. And even on this 10 card sample, you can see that there are cards that have this end of July as the last date, but there are cards like May, there is like June 2015 even, right? So those cards are really stopped, right? So you can see that some cards are still running, some cards are inactive, right? Now, if you look at this 728, it's not exactly 731, it's not the last date in the data set, but it's close enough. So this card clearly is active, right? So we cannot mark it as a stopped card. So I'm doing a little trick over here in the next step. I'm actually updating this date, and if the date is close enough, and close would be 4 weeks, right? If it's close enough to the last day of the data set, I'm going to update this date and make it 731. So we would not treat this particular card as inactive. Well, that's kind of my next step. So now this 728 was turned into 731. So at this point, I can actually calculate the cards and say, okay, total amount of cards we have 181, and 77 of those are inactive. That's a big number of cards after 1 year of operation. So clearly there is a problem, right? So just cards getting out of the system, that's probably the reason why the consumption is going down. We don't know for sure, but we suspect that that has something to do with that. So the next step, okay, let's find out of those 77 cards, how many cards are actually lost comparing to the cards where they went out of money and decided not to use them anymore. So to check that, we need to look at the remaining balance on those cards. So that's what I'm doing on this next step. I'm just looking at the balance, and if the balance on the card is actually more than 2, I'm saying, okay, this card has some money. If it's less than 2, it has no money. And this takes maybe a couple of seconds. And now we have 45 cards with non-zero balance. So out of those 77, 45 cards is probably genuinely lost. So people just lost cards with the money on them, and for whatever reason, they're not replacing them. Yes? Question?
But a lot of those graphs just had a big gap several days, so that would say that cards were lost, right?
Yeah, we looked at the gaps actually. That's one of the analysis we've done. We noticed that a lot of cards have gaps, and we looked at 10-day gaps, 20-day gaps, and 30-day gaps, right? And we actually discovered that those gaps are kind of correlated with rainy seasons. So during the rainy seasons, you would see a lot of those gaps, which actually is not something we want to see. Maybe more education needs to be done in those communities that rainwater may not be as clean as they think, right? But that's where the gaps come from. So yeah, I agree. Some of those lost cards may be just the gaps, right? But we think that most of them are really lost. Okay, so now we have this 45 out of 77. Okay, so let's just modify our data set a little bit. So for every day now we have how many active cards we had in the system and how many cards were lost, right? So we have that. And at this point, we can start plotting some additional charts just to double check our suspicion. You know, one thing that, well, on the next chart, I'm not talking about it. This is very, very simple chart. So we have active cards going down and lost cards going up. You know, why this chart is important? It basically shows that this number of lost cards going up gradually. There is no like a single jump when something happened and everybody lost their cards. And the same is active cards. It's gradual going down. So it's kind of leaking cards from the system one by one. And it actually correlates very well with the trend lines that we saw in the first chart. It's kind of the same gradient. So we know at this point, okay, it's not like one event that happened and we lost the cards. It's just gradual leaking out of the system. Okay, well, let's, you know, I'm still not at the point where I can come to the conclusion, but let's look at this way. Okay, maybe there is also like people just taking less water, right? So, and we saw it on some of the cards. They started to take a lot of water and then goes down, right? So maybe that's what's happening. They use their cards, but they take less water. So I want to actually have a chart for that. So I'm going to calculate. In order to make this chart, I need to know how many cards were used every day. So I would call it unique cards. It's like for every day, how many cards were used at the kiosk. And then if I know that number, I can look at total water consumption for this day divided by the number of cards, and I would know how much water on average was used. So I have that, and now I can print this chart. And well, what I see is kind of what I expected and almost hoped to see, that the trend line for daily average transaction per card per day is kind of stays the same. So people who is still using the system, they've been taking about 50 liters per day, and they still do the same. So it's not going up, it's not going down, it's the same number. So it really looks like it's a number of cards, because if the card is active, that's how much water they're going to take. Now, there's different points that we would like people to take more water over time. And actually, in some of the communities, in this Busiro community, another village in Uganda, we actually have the trend going up, this one. But staying flat is fine as well. So people using the same amount of water every day. So that's kind of ruled out. So the next step, okay, let's just finally confirm our suspicion. And on this chart, I'm going to plot my number of lost cards versus daily water consumption. And on this chart, it's actually pretty clear. You can see when we have more and more lost cards, those water consumption just going down. So it's basically going through this kind of thought process, through this set of steps. And again, it's a little bit simplified here, but we were able to come to those, I wouldn't say definite proofs, but very high probability kind of suspicions that that's what's going on there. So if I go back to my chart, that's what we came up with, and we talked to Water Mission as a result of this analysis, and came up with some recommendations. So first, let's address those lost cards. We ask a question, why people are not buying new cards when they lost the ones that they have. And what we found out from Water Mission, that they set it up in a way that it's actually prohibitive for people to buy a replacement card. I guess when they started the program, they thought, okay, let's make it expensive to buy replacement cards so people would be more careful with their cards and they would not lose it. But what we see is happening, that people still lose their cards, but because it's expensive to buy replacement cards, they're just not buying it, and that's the end of it. So what we recommend in Water Mission to do is kind of change this policy and make it affordable or more affordable for people to buy replacement cards, or maybe even distribute replacement cards. That's our second point. We want to run an experiment in this particular village. We can buy a bunch of cards ourselves and just distribute it to the households that lost their cards, and then monitor water consumption for maybe 2 or 3 months and see what happens. So if that experiment confirms our suspicion, if the trend is going to be reversed, then yes, that's what we should do in other communities as well. Just keep the number of cards in the system kind of constant or growing. And the third one is at the very beginning of the project, we think that it might be beneficial, instead of giving just 1 card to a household, well, give 2 or 3. Like, you go to Harris Teeter or Lovis, you get your VIP card, you get like a bunch of them. So if you lose one, you have the rest of them. So the same idea here. So let's just distribute several cards at the same time. So if they lose one, they have a replacement on hand. So that's our recommendations. And well, I'm glad to say that actually 2 days ago, our main contact person from Water Mission, she went to Uganda, and she's going to visit this particular community, talk to people on site, and I hope that some of those recommendations could be applied kind of very soon, right? And in the future projects, again, if what we discovered indeed holds ground, maybe a Water Mission will adjust their processes and make it better for the rest of the communities as well. And I think that's all I have. So thank you very much. Any questions? Yes.
Would it be possible for them to use like an account ID or account number like you had referenced in your code, if they could just remember that and then give it to the person in the kiosk, or they actually have to have the physical card?
right now they have to have physical card to get money, and even more at the beginning, some of the communities, they were allowing people to pay in cash, right? But they basically said that they don't want it because it's not being tracked in any way. So they kind of forced everybody to use the card. So you cannot go to a kiosk and just pay cash and get water. You know, we've seen interesting behaviors there that in the transaction log, people would go to the kiosk, they run their card, and we see in transactions that says, oh, you have zero balance on your card. So what happens next? We see a financial transaction from a card of the operator to the card of this person. Some money is being transferred, and then the next transaction, the water is being taken. So how we understand the sequence is a person comes to the kiosk, wants to get water, swipe their card, oh, I don't have any money, this is my cash, right? And operator says, okay, I'll take your cash, this is some credits on your card.
What other questions do we have?
How flexible is price? So if you want to track, if you lower the price of water, for example, you can measure if the use of ID cards increase.
That's a good point. We actually did not think about that. At least we did not ask Water Mission whether it's an option to change the price. So somehow it's set. It's not expensive, right? So it's literally like if you want to take 50 liters, it's cents, right? It's not expensive, but it is some money. And for those communities, obviously it's more than like in the United States. But that's a good point. Next time we'll talk to them, I'll ask this question.
Hello. So I had a few questions about sort of how the program is run or how you're planning on, I guess your organization is planning on running it over the long term. So I guess what I'm kind of curious about is like, what are the thoughts or plans on how to get like the community to like own their own water system and like make themselves like self-sufficient? Or is that a goal?
Yeah, that's exactly the goal. And that's why they pay for the water. So the idea behind it that if enough people in the community buy enough water, so this money that they spend would be enough to pay salary of the operator and maintenance cost. And if that happens in a community, then Water Mission just hands it over. So they don't get reimbursement for the initial setup. They just hand it over because there is enough money in the system now to maintain and sustain this kiosk.
So one other question is there. Someone had asked me if the Jupyter Notebook is available somewhere. Are you going to make that available?
Yeah, well, you mean the demo notebook?
Yeah.
I probably can make it available. It's kind of demo. I'm not sure about the data. I would need to talk to Water Mission about that.
Okay, so there is a chance that for the cards that had more than $2, you just assume they were lost. But is there a possibility that there are some cards that had money, but people are just not using them for other reasons?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite.
So you assume that the cards that had money but were no longer being used were lost, right? Like the card that had like more than $2 but were not being used were lost?
Oh, well, the 2 is not dollars. It's
Okay,
like
the number.
shillings. It's
Okay.
a very, very, very small amount.
Okay, let's call them shillings. So is there a possibility that there were cards with more than 2 shillings but were not being used for other reasons?
Yes, and we have some cards in the system like that. So I had 45 cards with the money that nobody's using. We think they lost. There might be other reasons. I agree, but we can't think of any. So maybe it's one of those gaps, like another person mentioned there. So it's maybe a prolonged gap. Maybe this particular family, some of them, they like pastoral, so they would have, I'm not sure if cattle, but some kind of a livestock, right? And they may go for a month somewhere else, and they just not in the village. So that might be happening. But I think most of those cars are actually lost.
Is there a point of contact within each of these communities that you guys reach out to in terms of like analyzing the data? So someone that could help you explain or interpret the trends that you see?
Yeah, kind of indirect. So we work with Water Mission, and they have people in the US here who are managing, they call them projects, right, in different countries. So there is a person responsible, let's say, for this particular community in Uganda for the project. So we can communicate with this person, and this person does have access to local people and can ask them questions. And we actually had some of our questions answered, but it's not a direct communication. So sometimes, we get an answer, sometimes we don't get an answer, sometimes we let's say we suggest, let's ingest more cards, right? We suggested it a number of weeks ago. This person communicated to the local community person, and they were why should we do that, right? So now this person going to Uganda, basically physically going to Uganda, and will talk to the staff on site about that and present some proof or our suspicions that might help.
So very interesting presentation. Thank you so much. I had read somewhere that Vodafone was initiating something that would enable people in Africa or rural parts of India to exchange money or pay through SMSs, through mobiles, like very simple handsets. So I'm not sure how the data connectivity or the network availability is in that part of the region, but it would be a lot easier to do all the transactions through like a mobile or a cell, right? You could even collect data by sending messages or information, do payments, all sorts of things.
Yeah, it might be an option actually. And again, maybe based on our research here, Water Mission will decide to change their system with cards and everything completely. Who knows? But as far as connectivity, they do have connectivity. You'd be surprised. We talk to this Water Mission people. They would say, like, everybody has a cell phone there. They can make calls, but not everybody has access to water. So sometimes they need to call somebody to find out, oh, this well 4 hours away from my current place, does it have water? Should I go there or not, right? So those kind of questions, but they have cell phones and they have connectivity there. So again, it might be an option, but it's for Water Mission to decide if they want to go that route.
Thank you.
Well, another round of applause for Vladimir. Thank you so much.